the choices that narcissists make. There is an ongoing debate as to what causes narcissism, and the desire to come up with the ultimate answer leads some people to decide that a narcissist is born that way, while others place an emphasis on the environment the narcissist grows up in and believe that to be the cause. This is the debate between nature, genetics, and nurture, environment. The problem is the fact that each person is different and every environment is different, meaning that no one answer can be applied to any one individual. The truth is that the final outcome that produces the covert pathological narcissist is a team effort of nature and nurture. In some narcs the cause may be nearly all nature, in others nearly all nurture, in yet others it is a more equal combination of the two. The cluster of pathological traits that includes narcissism is a subject of intense study among mental health professionals, but the safe conclusion to come to as to what causes narcissism is that both genetic predisposition and environment play a role. Here is a brief clip of a TEDx talk presented by Baron Cohen to explain the role nature and environment play in empathy. A link to the video is in the description.
Empathy has two distinct components: cognitive and affective. Cognitive empathy is the ability to imagine someone else's thoughts and feelings, putting yourself into someone else's shoes. It's the recognition part. Affective empathy is the drive to respond with an appropriate emotion to what someone else is thinking or feeling. And I'm going to argue that low affective empathy is a necessary factor to explain human cruelty. Individuals like Ted Bundy, we can assume that he had good cognitive empathy because he was able to deceive his victims, but that he lacked affective empathy. He just didn't care, and he lacked it in enduring ways. Empathy isn't all or none. It comes by degrees, and there are individual differences in it, so it gives rise to the empathy bell curve. Most of us are in the middle of this spectrum with average amounts of empathy. There are some people who have above average levels of empathy. The psychopath has good cognitive empathy. That's how they can deceive, but they have reduced affective empathy. Psychopaths don't come out of nowhere. Many of them have shown antisocial behaviour and delinquency in their teens. John Bowlby at the Tavistock Clinic in London studied delinquents and found that many of them had experienced emotional neglect in early childhood. He argued that the absence of parental love in early childhood is another factor that can erode your empathy. But we know that early experience can't be the whole story, because not everyone who has a bad childhood loses their empathy. Avshalom Caspi at the Institute of Psychiatry in London showed that if you've experienced severe maltreatment in childhood, that increases your risk of delinquency. But your risk of delinquency goes up even more if you're also a carrier of one version of the MAOA gene, shown here in red. So genes and environment interact.
Yes, we do need to go to a narcissist's childhood, especially the first 5 years of life, to try to pinpoint the cause of the narcissism. Yes, we have to take into account the responsibility of the parent, and we have to see if there is any possible culpability on the child's end as well. The ultimate blame, the person primarily responsible for the unfortunate creation of an adult covert narcissist, can rest on the shoulders of the parent or the child, or be split almost exactly in half. Yes, variability is not something most people are comfortable with. A clear-cut answer makes life easier for everyone, but it isn't always helpful if we want to truly understand what is going on that produces these demonic creatures we call covert narcissists. Yes, there is a spiritual cause as well, but today we will try to look at the observable facts and try to at least get a better idea of the origins of covert narcissism. Now, a recent study of psychopathy and patterns in child behavior looking at the parent-child relationship looked at exactly that. Is the child to blame for the parents not responding properly, or are the parents responsible for the child not responding properly? The results are eye-opening and confirm the above statement that the causes of dysfunctional adults is a complex one. Let's just listen to a few key moments of this TEDx talk given by Luna Centifonti. A link to this video is in the description.
And I'm interested in these few kind of individuals. So luckily, these are the few, but they show a persistent problem behavior that's more aggressive and tend to not feel bad when they do things wrong and just don't have a conscience for having done bad behavior. In my early work, I found that there were children, again, few, that remained cool and kind of not bothered when they performed an aggression task where they were playing and competing against a fake opponent. In my research, I found that there were some who stayed kind of cool as a cucumber at the same time that they were really aggressive. So their hearts didn't really react. Their sweating really didn't go up. And again, these were a few individuals within the larger population of people that had problem behaviors. They also tended to show particular characteristics. So in terms of psychopathic traits, they were less caring about the feelings of other people, less caring about other people's values. They didn't have empathy for other people and couldn't kind of share in other people's emotional expressions. So, you know, these psychopathic traits tended to kind of delineate a certain kind of individual. These were the few amongst the uniform. And I'm going to argue that, again, these are distinct individuals that show a particular pattern of behavior. Those that had initially high conduct problem behaviors, shown in the black line, I followed them over time to see how their behaviors developed. And you can see that at time 2 years later, they're much higher than those who initially started with low conduct problem behaviors. But there's a pattern here, or a distinctiveness based on psychopathic traits. Those that had high conduct problem behaviors and high psychopathic-like traits at the initial survey were actually much higher than all the other individuals. And this is compared to those who initially had the same level of conduct problem behaviors at the initial survey, but who were low in psychopathic-like traits. So they're increasing in their conduct problem behaviors over time at an enormous rate. And this is contrasted from those who initially started low. And high psychopathy is not always related to problem behaviors, although I would expect them to still be quite hurtful interpersonally. The juxtaposition of people and their environments is also important. So the thought is that being a bad child is because you're with a bad parent. In that way, we think that perhaps the parent is a cause of the problem behavior. If we change the parent, the child changes, perhaps the parent was the cause after all. So that juxtaposition of a child with a particular parent may be quite important. The environment in which the child is growing up may be very important. That led us to kind of look at clinical populations of kids to kind of understand where their problem behaviors come from. We think that parents' behavior is a huge contributing factor to the problem behaviors in those kids. But there was a really cool study done where they took children with problem behaviors. These were children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and they gave them to other parents, parents of children who didn't have problem behaviors. Now, it was only temporary, it wasn't like forever, but they gave them to these new parents. And so really that juxtaposition of having a new parent with that problem behavior child should yield good behavior from that child. Actually, what happened was the parents tended to respond negatively to that child's problem behavior. So the old adage, you're driving me crazy, could actually hold water. Actually, the juxtaposition could work the other way. So it could be that the poor parenting that we see from parents is actually a reaction to the child's problem behavior. We do know from influential research that when you have kind of a, I called the other one a cool one, so we'll call this one kind of the hot child. We know that children who kind of push parents' buttons and push the boundaries of what they can get away with and have tantruming and whining and crying, that parents sometimes respond in kind, or sometimes parents back away from kind of controlling that problematic child because it becomes so difficult. And over time, this process could unfold with the child pushing further and further. Maybe the second time, the parent tries to hold their ground. But with this escalation of problem behaviors from the child, from tantruming, the child learns, if I push just that bit further, my parent will back down and I'll get what I want. Child then learns, if I just push those boundaries, especially when it's on public display, I might get what I want. So there might be some children that are particularly attuned to the rewarding aspects of their problem behaviors. So they're aware of that payout, and they kind of live for it. And these are children that, again, I argue are more cool and more kind of callous the way that they use other people, who don't feel for other people and lack emotional depth. We call these callous and unemotional traits. They're part of the psychopathic trait dimension. Callous unemotional traits have now been added to diagnostic criteria of clinical disorders from the American Psychiatric Association that mental health workers use. And what we know is that children with callous unemotional traits don't respond as much to parents' behaviors. And in that way, we almost think of them as being resilient. Now, usually resilience is a good thing. You're resilient to resistant to bacteria, resilient to, stressful life events. But actually, these children might be more resilient in that they're not affected by their environment, which could be a negative thing. For the hot child, what we know is that the things that influence their problematic behavior are things like not being able to communicate effectively with other people, lacking in intellectual functioning or reasoning ability. We also know that it's related to, their problem behaviors might be related to poor parenting, being too harsh or being too lax in your parenting. But also their problem behaviors might result from, hanging around bad peers, for example. In contrast, the child who is more cool is actually more calculated in their behavior. And so their problem behaviors, as I've shown in previous work of mine, is not related to poor intellectual functioning. They're pretty normal in intellectual functioning. They're able to reason quite well. They're able to communicate well. Their poor behaviors, recent research shows, is probably not related to hanging out with bad peers. So possibly it's motivated from their own kind of personality. And like I suggested, their problem behaviors, those who are high in callous unemotional traits are shown in the blue line, they're probably not related to poor parenting. So their conduct problem behaviors are not linked up to poor parenting, whereas the hot ones are. For the high callous unemotional child, they're high regardless of what their parents' parenting is like. What this would suggest is that perhaps children with callous unemotional traits don't change their spots based on their environment. One thing that we hadn't really considered from all the prior research is whether instead of being affected by their environment, perhaps children with callous unemotional traits are changing their environment. Perhaps they're creating an environment in which their problem behaviors are just simpler to get away with. The more that they engage in problem behaviors or have more conduct problems, parents tended to become more distressed over time based on those problem behaviors. Parents also became more erratic and less stable in their control. So, setting limits and having curfews and things like this, they tended to be more erratic if they had a child with callous unemotional traits. And lastly, if these children showed severe problem behavior, so if they had delinquent behavior, their parents even more reduced in their control or backed off in terms of the control. So these children seem to be more resilient to those parenting strategies, and they're also creating an environment in which their behavior might be more less controlled. And so they're able to engage in problem behaviors over time because their environment is changing to suit that problem behavior. Parents are reacting to the behavior. And not only are parents aware of the conduct problem behaviors and kind of reacting to them, they're actually reacting to the way in which those problem behaviors are evidenced without remorse. So one way that we can change, even though parents may not be the cause of problem behaviors, we can definitely make them a part of the process to eliminate problem behaviors. So it could be that focusing on the emotional connection early on could diffuse the effects of callous unemotional traits. Work in my lab and others shows that parental warmth, for example, is one way to diffuse the effects of callous unemotional traits. Another way is to talk to children about thoughts and feelings early on. Any mistakes are fixed simpler early on rather than later when the pattern might become too complex to fix it.
So what does this mean in layman's terms? My interpretation is this, that sometimes the child is the actual cause of the parents being unable to properly train the child, and other times it is the parents that are to blame for the child becoming a dysfunctional adult. Now again we must take into account the element of variability. Yes, there is a constant interaction between the child and the parent in those critical formative years before the age of 5, but the data can be analyzed so that a general conclusion can be made. Again, to keep it simple, sometimes the parents share the larger portion of responsibility, are to blame, and sometimes the largest part of the dysfunction is actually due to the personality of the child is to blame. The other possibility, that sometimes the blame can be equally attributed to the parents and to the child, is also to be expected, since these scenarios and the actual people that were studied are all on a spectrum. So, how does this apply to the covert pathological narcissist? Well, it all boils down to the decisions the narcissist makes, starting as early as we can go, to the very first decision a child makes. We have all heard of stubborn and hard to handle children, as well as children that are compliant and easy. That already shows us that the genetic predisposition of a child plays an important role in the final product that is a narcissistic adult. Regardless of if the narcissist has neglectful or loving parents, strict or lenient parents, the ultimate outcome of narcissism always starts with a behavior pattern, a decision of how to respond to a situation that the environment presents the narcissist with. So the origins of narcissism can then begin to come into focus, become clear. The narcissist is a person who never takes others into account, has no compassion or empathy, and considers themselves more important than anyone else. The narc has developed a pattern of behavior where they no longer have any qualms about lying. The narc has developed a behavior pattern that has continually eroded their empathy to the point where they have little or no empathy. The narc has continually ignored their conscience to the point where it became calloused and then seared, so again the conscience is in effect non-existent. Yes, in short, the narcissist is a bad person, an evil person, and they became that way by continually indulging in bad and evil behavior throughout their lives. The narc became someone who doesn't have a shred of decency. There is no doubt that many an adult narcissist can no longer help themselves because they are so locked into the cycle of lying, duplicity, treachery, and deceit. They can't help but destroy those around them. Some people will argue that narcissists do need our understanding, or that we should just avoid them and just not make ourselves vulnerable to them. How does that even take into account that the covert narcissist purposely hides their true self and is an expert at deception? That doesn't even take into account that most people are unaware of covert narcissism and that the narcissist by design is a predator that purposely seeks out their victims. So isn't it really giving these narcissistic beasts a little more slack than they deserve to say that they can't help themselves? How can we even take the outrageous claim that they don't know what they are doing, don't know right from wrong seriously? Rest assured, the narcissist knows exactly what they are doing, and if they can't help themselves it is for one reason and one reason alone: they always refuse to make the right choice whenever given the opportunity. Yes, they made the wrong, the evil choice every single time with very few exceptions. Let's be very clear, the narcissist is an adult and they are responsible to be an adult, so do they really have any excuse at all? No, they do not. They have no excuse whatsoever. So we go back in time to childhood development and look into the past of any narcissist. We go to the day that they had enough awareness to make a choice. The choice to listen to someone, in this case their parent, give authority to someone that was greater than themselves, or to refuse, usurp the authority and do it their way. As the child grew, the choice to do right or wrong was given them countless times, and each time they did it their way, right or wrong. Whether that parent was a responsible parent or an irresponsible parent is almost irrelevant. We are focusing on the narcissist and the narcissist alone. Yes, there was a point where the narc had to listen to a reasonable demand from their parent, or decide not to listen and rebel, to stiffen their neck. As the child got older, there were more and more complex choices to make, more sophisticated choices to make, but the narc simply became more sophisticated in their rebellion and lack of concern for what was right or wrong. As the narc became an adult and needed employment, they began understanding the necessity of giving the appearance of listening, but they covertly never really gave up an ounce of authority to another human being. Similarly, in relationships, the narcissist realized the necessity of giving the appearance of concern and of being cooperative and willing to compromise. Yes, that was necessary to get a foot in the door. Once the relationship was locked in, the narc gradually and insidiously began taking full control. The general overview of the narcissist gives us a picture of a person who was addicted from early childhood to get it their way, never feeling the need to give any other human being authority, never feeling the need to live by the standards of decency, of right and wrong that broader society had agreed upon. Yes, the narc understood the importance, the necessity of appearing to live by the rules, appearing to believe that it was important to do the good, the right thing, but underneath it all the narc was never really going to relinquish an ounce of having things their way. On the inside of that narcissist the rules were very clear-cut. The world revolves around the narcissist. The narcissist reigns in that world, is the supreme being who makes all moral judgments upon their own actions and the actions of others. The narc is the judge, and the narcissist's judgment is final, no mercy. The people that the narc comes in contact with are merely there for the use of the narcissist. These people have no sovereignty or rights, only the narcissist has rights, and only the narcissist's needs are important. So now we begin to see that the narcissist never had any problems making their choices. Choices such as, do I tell the truth or do I lie? Do I steal because I can get away with it, or do I walk away? Do I turn the other cheek or get even at all costs? The list is endless, but the point to be made is that at every stage of development, every choice the narcissist encountered, they almost always chose the easiest way, what was best for them and them alone, never even really considering what was the right or moral thing to do. Never considering the effects their choices might have on other human beings. Yes, the narcissists certainly appeared to be an adult and certainly learned to make themselves sound and look reasonable and even moral. But sadly this was all an act, and even more sadly their victims were fully deceived by that mask, the act the narcissist put on. Because the narcissist had no moral compass, no outside authority, this led to a pattern of decisions, of choices that were increasingly less and less moral. Yes, the choice to be evil was the exact result, the consequence, the culmination of a lifetime of the narc having it their way. That route never even took into account anyone else in their environment. The narc's path of selfishness was a long road with ever-increasing covetousness and sophistication, to the point where a narcissist's selfishness could literally appear as an act of altruism to the uninformed public. Those who are aware are no longer deceived, but most of the world will just take that kind, noble, gracious, generous, compassionate, empathetic, genuine, humble narcissist on face value. But not those who are awake. They know the truth of what lurks beneath the mask. For the narcissist it was always all about them and them alone. So, if you want to ultimately judge any human being, every single human on this planet is the result of a myriad of choices that were made each and every moment of their lives. In a way, the final result, the adult that we are presented with, is the final product, the final exam result so far of all of the choices we have made in our lives. Yes, the narcissist is a resounding failure as a human being, and perhaps even a grade of F is too lenient a judgment. But the scale will never go to the depths that would be necessary to give the narcissist the true grade they deserve. Yes, the narc is far worse than just a failure as a human being. They are the source of so much suffering and multiple other failures of all of the people that they come in contact with. The beginning of this video spoke about nature and nurture, and those subjects are very important and necessary to take into account. But here is the narcissist's problem: they are an adult, and there comes a point in every person's life when they reach an age of accountability, when they are responsible for their words and actions and how they treat others. They are responsible for all that they say and do. Yes, the narc will deny that fact to themselves and to the world and believe that it is possible for them to do as they please and never grow up or develop any level of emotional maturity. How is this even possible? Well, the narcissist fails to understand that they are not the center of the world, and they simply can't comprehend that in order to coexist with others they have to give those other people the possibility of sometimes having things to their liking and make others more important than themselves. Despite all of the complexity, it really boils down to this simple fact: the narcissist is a bad person who is aware that they are doing bad things, and there is never really any excuse whatsoever for being a bad person. Whether that narcissist had a bad upbringing and is emulating the duplicity and treachery that they learned by observing their parents, or the narc simply became that way due to the parents allowing them to indulge in their strong-willed, stiff-necked attitude of self-entitlement, it is all the same. Yes, the narcissist may have some excuses for being a narcissist, but there is never any excuse for being a bad, an evil person. The narcissist does know better. The narcissist knows how to be kind to people and considerate. After all, they did exactly that when they first ensnared their victim during the mirroring idealization phase of a relationship. They are always impeccably kind and respectful on their social sites and in any public function. But those who know the narcissist behind closed doors have a very different story to tell. The story of a selfish, self-centered beast that hasn't got an ounce of respect or decency. The narcissist knows right from wrong. The narcissist chooses to do the wrong thing, to be evil, and that takes us back to our original conclusion: the narcissist is the result, the aggregate of all of the wrong and questionable decisions that they have made throughout their lives. Yes, they may have had poor parenting that didn't give the right example. Yes, they may have been subject to abuse, or perhaps it was the opposite. They had parents that let them do as they pleased and overindulged them. It really doesn't matter at all. At some point the narcissist had their own choice to do right or wrong, good or bad, and at each and every opportunity to do the right thing they chose the opposite. Yes, they are adults, they are responsible, and they have locked themselves into bad behavior, but ultimately as an adult they have no excuse whatsoever. Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome. Peace be with you.